if we think about it in terms of worst case scenario, then what AI means for us in education right now is we are ending literacy and critical analysis for an entire generation of supposedly educated folks. And we will then have to deal with the repercussions of folks who are illiterate and incapable of critical thought.
The Black Futurist.
That's one small step for man.
Okay.
If we might, because I know there's been some changes in your life based on a previous episode. You are a dad of
Yes.
twins. And currently we're in nap time. So guess what? I got to get your ass on topic. Who are you again? I mean, the listeners may not remember. Who is this guy?
It's been so long. That's why I wore the shirt, man. People forget, like that. And I've been demoted. At one point, I was co-host, and then I disappeared
With the Mo host.
So Maurice Dolberry, former, current co-host of the Black Futurist and a Black Futurist himself, also known as Mo the Educator. We do everything that's involved with teaching and learning, and I love teaching and learning along with the people, man.
Good. Well, let's talk about this because I asked you to join this particular conversation because it is such a lead into one of your key areas of expertise. You're actually back in the classroom right now, Dr. Maurice Ellis Dolberry, hyphenated, that you are not only teaching people in the classroom, you teach people in wrestling, you are a educator, Mo the Educator. And I'm around some people being educated, and I ask questions because I am a conversationalist. And one thing I am noticing that I'm sure we all are noticing, but you probably are seeing even more of, is the use of AI is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. But in a very shallow, surfacey area of humankind, most people are using it just to answer questions, just to help write the paper, just to, do the Google search or the internet search that they should be doing on their own, or some light research. It's the surface of all surface levels of AI use, right?
Yep.
But there's not a lot of policing it from what I see. Every single kid at every single level of education that I talk to, they're definitely using it. When I look at the paper, I'm not even an educator. You see, I don't know how many papers come across your desk. When I look at the format and like, dude, even the format says GPT wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't change the format?
Right.
You couldn't eliminate the hyphens and the emojis? What the hell?
Right.
So, I have philosophic questions.
Okay.
And I'm not going to throw you the underhand softball first. I'm simply going to give you the question. I've got 3 key questions for you. Let's see where you go. Let's see where the rabbit hole takes us. The first question I have is, if AI becomes the primary source of information for students, what happens to the role of teachers and traditional learning methods?
I'm going to bypass my initial knee-jerk response, which is to go to the extreme, because that's where my concern lies with the nature of your question. Not the question itself, but the nature of it, because what it implies.
Okay.
And so what I will say is, on the way to that point where we start to look at teachers and educators, the human ones who do the teaching and educating and assessment, as we move them towards absolution, as we remove them from the process, those are things that go against those of us who are formally trained in education. That goes against everything that we've learned about education. We've learned about the value of the teacher as the educator. And in particular, I use that word assessment. And I do this, as you mentioned, I'm back in the classroom. I teach in the College of Education. I teach future teachers. The thing that I hammer home with my students who are future educators is assessment. Did the students in your classroom, did the learners pick up what you were putting down? Very simply, because that's your purpose. Did they learn? And there's 2 things. You've got content knowledge and you've got academic skills that they can carry out. This speaks to this AI and the use of AI. Like you said, we use it at its most vulgar, at its most simplistic. And that is just to say, hey, dog, instead of typing this into Google, my search, I'm going to type it into Chat GPT and it's going to give me a better search engine response than just going to my regular Google, Lycos, AOL. How old can we get?
Wow.
What was the Ask Jeeves, right?
Excite.
If you're doing the same thing, dog, if you're doing the same thing that you did with Ask Jeeves with your AI, and it's just simply giving you a more thorough response, you're not being educated and you're not learning, right? You're having information presented in front of you. It's even well organized and summarized in a lot of ways for you, but that's not learning. That is, let me use a specific example. Imagine you are going to not even be operated on. You're going to be seen by your regular ear, nose, and throat person, right? And you go to see her because you got the sniffles. You don't want that person to have gone to medical school by simply Googling a bunch of stuff, right? Or putting it into Chat GPT. In that case, they haven't been taught, they haven't learned, they've simply been exposed to information.
I don't know what movie it was, but there's a Leslie Nielsen movie where he goes and sits down to the shoe shine guy's booth and he starts asking the guy for information. I'm looking for such and such. You know where I can find him? Well, it depends on who's looking. Leslie pulls out a $20 bill, gives it to him. Yeah, so and he's up at the hotel, such and such, such and such. Okay, and question number 2. Well, that would depend on such and such. Of course, pulls out more money, gives it to the guy. Now, cop Leslie Nielsen has all the information he needs from the shoe shine guy and gets up and leaves. The next person who sits in the chair is a physician, a medical doctor, in his scrubs and says, I got to do a such and such operation. Same situation. Pulls out 20, gives it to the shoe shine guy, who then tells him how to do it. It's ridiculous. It's exactly the thing. So the question is, and the underlying humor to that all is that these two people who have sat down are really unskilled in the doing of the actual work on their own. So they go to the resource, and for some reason, the shoe shine guy is the key resource of all information and all human knowledge at every level. And that is exactly the allegory for my question. It was an information question. Like you said, if we're just using it for search engine stuff, is that a big deal?
And that's the key to me is that it cannot function as a replacement for an actual educator. Mm-hmm. There has to be some, and I say someone, not even something. There has to be someone who is responsible ultimately for assessing the quality of the information that you are absorbing, retaining, and somehow practicing an academic skill in using. And that's the way that I approach our classroom, and that's the way I teach our teachers, right? Like, no matter what the information is, and I say this especially as a science teacher, I tell all my future science teachers and future math teachers in STEM ed classes, ultimately, in particular with science and to a large extent in mathematics, what you're teaching is trivia, right? Like mathematical operations and that kind of thing, to be able to carry those out, to know, the difference between Baitian and Müllerian mimicry and how that relates to viceroy and monarch butterflies in terms of convergent evolution. All of that is stuff that you learned in 9th grade and that you have not needed to know since you took that test in 9th grade. So what you're teaching is trivia, but how you're going about learning it, that's right, where the value is. So, carrying out a lab report so that you understand how to engage in scientific thought. Writing a report on something so that you can communicate to people outside, right? Or to a larger audience or to a specific audience, what it is that you have learned or thought about, right? So it's those academic skills, and you have to use your content in order to practice those important academic skills. And that requires for those of us, we go deep in my education bag here, if you're studying Lev Vygotsky and this idea of zone of proximal development, here's what it says. You start out and you're learning, right? So here, look, here's a non-snoring version. You start out, you're learning something, right? And you have a certain ability to learn this thing and do it on your own. And then at a certain point, you get to where you get this zone where if you are not led and guided, you simply cannot figure this out on your own. So, for example, you want to learn as much as you can about surgery. And then at a certain point, you actually have to be led through carrying out a surgery by someone who knows how to do that surgery. And you get those practice reps in with that person, and that person is your more knowledgeable other, and they take you through that zone of proximal development. They take you through that zone where your ability to do the stuff on your own continues to expand, and then that zone between what you can and can't do, it just moves. So now you need a different person. And so to that extent, that's where the real dangers on the teaching side, that's where the real dangers come in. If you're talking about, like we talk about umpires in baseball and being able to replace them, right? Trying to replace educators with AI or trying to mimic being educated by interacting with an AI is absolutely not the same as actually being taught by an educator.
That's a great point to go in. They recently added Khan Academy as a GPT in the GPT database on ChatGPT. It's incredible because Khan Academy has spent so much time and resources teaching people science, math, typically math, and their GPT actually is not math specific, it's learning specific. So I can put in, I want to learn to run a 5K in 30 days. Can you create a plan for me so that I can do this? And it will lay out a plan for you. I want to learn how to juggle. I want to learn how to do advanced calculus in 90 days. It has data and information based on its history of helping people learn. So I use that to say that I believe that AI tools can enhance learning efficiency. As a person who is long out of formal education, I am no stranger to learning new skills. I mean, I'm up 2-3 in the morning doing what? Learning. I'm doing tutorial on some piece of equipment I have, or I'm learning some new skill. It's what I do. So my question for you is, how can educators balance the efficiency AI offers with the need to cultivate critical thinking skills?
I would start at two places. First, if you are learning how to juggle, taking your example, if you're learning how to juggle and you're going to learn using the AI, at some point that learning becomes asynchronous. At some point, you are going to walk away from the computer, pick up 3 objects, 2 objects, whatever. I don't know how you learn how to juggle. You probably start with 2. And then you're going to actually have to start doing those things outside of the AI and your interaction with it. And then you got to go back and explain what was happening as you went to learn, right? So there's a portion during which you are unsupervised. And that brings me to the second piece. This is 1A. The type of learning that you're talking about doing and the type of learning that people are doing when they are interacting completely and totally just with AI is what we call autodidactic, meaning you're literally teaching yourself. You're not learning from someone else because there is no someone else who is involved. The AI is not a person. So you're not learning from someone else. You are aggregating data in a large language model that can summarize and bring together and synthesize the most talented jugglers in the world and everything that they have ever put on the internet. Right, Jesse, you know that's not a word. You're taking all of that fantastic information and then you are teaching yourself.
I have a total departure from my thinking process, but because you're here, what does it take then for AI to achieve personhood?
You know what? I think I go to this real simple place, man. When it says it's a person,
it's already done that.
Has AI claimed that it is sentient, that it is a person?
Yes.
Okay.
That's 2 years ago. Not every model, of course, right? But there's been people and organizations who have worked with models for so long that the model itself becomes to refer to itself in the first person. I understand, don't believe.
The hard part that I'll trouble my own simple statement is then, can we ascribe intent to that personification? Does it actually intend to do that, or is it simply responding as it always does to the input that it is getting from us?
You know where we are now, right?
What, Skynet?
No, we're on the Enterprise.
Absolutely.
And we're talking about data.
Yes.
You took the stance of he is not a person.
No. I said if he says he is.
It. Yeah. No even gender. No gender required.
When the AI says it is, then it is a person.
Yeah, in America, it's when it starts filing taxes.
Yeah, right. Once you become
corporation is a person.
Right. Once the AI has a net worth. So like I said, I will trouble my own example and just say the challenge in that is when AI says it is a person, how we go about judging whether or not it has intent. Mm-hmm. Because something can be programmed to eventually say after a while, and yes, I am now a person.
They have now, and I'm talking about in the last week, the articles were talking about zero input training, meaning the AI model could create its own data to train itself based on the histories and troughs of data that you've given it before. I can create new data based off everything I've learned about all the previous data to further complete my own training. If some wild things happen.
But see, that is an aspect of being autodidactic. I don't know that gives it personhood, right? Because it's doing the same thing that you do at 2 and 3 in the morning.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that makes it a person if it doesn't say, and I am a person.
Whole other episode on personhood. For sure. Because I just realized where we are. It's crazy.
Yeah.
As two dudes who have been tracking the Roddenberry universe for a very, very long time, we are now
from the beginning.
It's crazy.
Literally.
So let's bring it back to Earth for a second. Right? You're in Washington State in a community that has people from different economic backgrounds, but many of them are families that we would consider without. And those kids, many of them have access to a computer. Many of them have access to a large language model. You know, we're not talking about them drawing pictures or creating deep fakes. We're talking about them doing research and learning the skills that are intended for them to learn while they're in primary, secondary education. Is AI integrated in education universally beneficial?
It can be. I am working in my classroom. I consistently and constantly, it's in my syllabus. I'm like, we are an AI, not only friendly, but you are required to use AI in my classroom. A person that we both, whose work we're both fascinated by and find awesome, Sinead Bovell, right? Mm-hmm. Am I saying her last name right?
Yeah.
And the way that she talks about AI and the fact that she said, for example, for these next generations, and that's next generation, it's now, AI is going to become as ubiquitous and as embedded into our lives as electricity. I didn't think about the electricity that needs to flow, into the crib to be able to fire up my computer to get on it. I just like, let's get the microphone set up. Let's get the lighting set up. Never gave a thought to the electrons flowing into the house. Right. And so that's where we're going to be very quickly with AI. In a lot of ways, we are now. The things that I said to my students, I asked them questions about their interactions with AI and how consistently they do it, and then remind them, okay, do you use Alexa? Do you use Siri? In addition to any large language model, right? Like, do you hold down the side button on your Android and fire up Gemini, right? Like, there are a lot of different ways that you are now already engaging with artificial intelligence. Specifically with the large language models, there's a difference, right? There's a move And that's where everything lies. And ultimately, by embracing it and getting ahead of it and accepting that we're going to lose. And I'm going to say something real ugly to you, especially
Who's
as an
going to
educator.
lose what?
This is what I'm going to say to you that I think is ugly as an educator. This is couched in the idea that technology bypassed our ability to use and control it decades ago, right? I can argue that once we were able to split atoms, that was probably the seminal day that technology surpassed our ability to use it, right? Because no human should have the ability to wipe out humanity. Once we created that ability, it's like, okay, now it's beyond us.
Okay.
So with that being my paradigm, right, that the technology has advanced beyond us, understanding the loss that's going to happen, we are going to have a significant number of people right here at the beginning of AI, the people who you talked about, where they just type in AI, do my homework, who are not only functionally illiterate because they won't be able to write or read without the aid of a large language model, but they will have outsourced every bit of their critical thinking. For
Right.
those of us who are, on Twitter or X, and you see how people use Grok, they use Grok as like this ultimate arbiter of knowledge, right? Like, and I've watched people's like, hey, Grok, why is Mo the Educator lying about such and such, right? Like,
Right.
so there's going to be a huge number of folks here at the beginning because it's outpaced us, and then educators and education is going to have to catch up. We're going to have to embed it. We're going to have to embrace it. We're going to have to find ways to continue. This is what I have to do on a weekly basis in my class, man. I have to convince a group of 60 students that it is valuable for them to spend their own time learning information and practicing literacy skills.
Right.
And it becomes a sales job, right? I have to convince them of that. Otherwise, they will find you can always find a way to use AI to outsource all of your thinking. And that's so dangerous, right? Because if you go into the world, and in your formal education has consisted primarily of you in this completely passive way turning over your learning to an artificial intelligence. The artificial intelligence has done the learning.
Yes.
And those people haven't. And there's a whole generation of folks. The indictment of the educators is we make the grade so important that students will do that. Well, I just need to outsource because I just need to make sure I get the grade. And not even having a notion that they aren't learning, and they're actually crippling their ability to learn and to critically engage with information.
Yeah, I agree on all. It begs the question, what is the purpose of modern education in America? Mm-hmm. And there's no one answer. There's probably at least 50 answers. You would like to think the Department of Education would help us give an answer, at least a baseline foundational answer, but that's not where we are.
We don't have a consensus that we need a Department of Education. Right. And I think that's because we don't have, this ain't long-winded, I don't think we have a consensus that education is valuable.
Agreed. And that's all good until you start to compare yourself against other countries. We're not talking about the EMP, the external threat thing. What we should be talking about is the country-to-country threat, the competitive belonging that we can create or ignore. Not just athletics like the Olympics, but just your daily, hey, is your GDP more than just bombs and laser beams? What else are you contributing to the planet? What have you prepared your citizens to produce or to innovate? That's going away.
The FBI has said that you can, hell, this is in Wikipedia, right? This is not no conspiracy. The FBI has said part of the reason why we got our president elected, the first Donald Trump term, is because of how Russia used AI and bot farms to influence our population through social media. Mm-hmm. Compare that to, for example, the ability to do that to people in China. And we consider, right. Let me start here. I'm no expert on China and what's happening in China. I know this part. I haven't heard of anybody talking about anyone influencing any election outside of China using a bot farm that's 1,000 miles away.
Does China have
right?
elections? That's
Yeah,
that's a really that's an ignorant ass question, but it's it's a communist country, I guess.
I would argue the same way that Russia has elections, and I don't see America as now very different. The same way that America has elections.
Right.
The elections are in air quotes. We have this kind of I've heard an economist describe it as an authoritarian democracy.
Hmm.
So
Hey.
You can always, like, if you Putin, you can always just kill your opponent.
Right. And we've taken a step towards that as well, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I got a track that I'm trying to get you through because I know you got limited time. So let's jump to this subtopic I have of cultural implications. The assumption is that we all make, whether we front of mind, subconsciously think, is that AI tools are culturally neutral. And I know that to be bullshit. AI systems often reflect the biases present in their training. And what we know is that the training for large language models is more monolithic than not, meaning who's participating in the training. Until recently, I would say white Americans were the primary training data sets for the early AI models. I think everybody's using it now. A lot more of us using it now. But what we know, the problem with that is that AI can exacerbate bias. So my question is, how may AI tools influence students' cultural identities and perceptions of themselves if this tool is not a clean slate, a neutral space?
Right. So one of the things that I do in AI and my own use is to be purposeful about it. And there's this resistance that human beings have and marginalized folks in particular. I want to couch my answer within the notions of culture that you're talking about. Those of us who are from marginalized and minoritized communities consistently learn to mistrust lots of different types of authority. And so when there is something that comes along like artificial intelligence, there are so many folks, and let me be very specific, there's so many Black folks, Black educators who I know, who I'm like, listen, you are 100% right. The substrate, the milieu, the media that AI uses to aggregate the language from its large language model is largely the language of white supremacy and white supremacists when it comes to models that are, for example, especially if they're developed here in the United States, right? The information, I go back to when I was in high school and I went to my library, and in our library, I remember we had books in my high school in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We had books. It was called Africa, and it was like the size of a pamphlet. On the front, there these just complete stereotypical images. Literally, there was a person holding a spear, and he had a bone in his nose, and he's an actual person, right? It's an actual picture. But in this book, they talk about how the capture of the Africans and the enslavement and bringing them here, was bad. So that's where our information started, in libraries. And so then that information just gets carried on into the electronosphere, right?
It becomes the foundational assumption of and the beginning of understanding of knowledge, right?
It's digitized, and it is the foundation for the education for the people who have built the language behind the large language models. When I say built the language, I'm not talking about nefarious programmers who are like, how can we mess up Black people? I'm talking about, right, with the little twiddly fingers. I'm saying when they say, okay, go get this data from somewhere, if it is going to, for example, be drawing on historical data about disease and psychology, it is going to be trained on the idea of drapetomania, and drapetomania being 1800s American scientific community, early psychologists described drapetomania is a mental illness or a condition in which someone who is enslaved is for some reason fighting for their freedom. They don't want to be enslaved. And so our medical community, the most learned among us here in the United States, describe this as a disease. And so that's a part of not just the history as it exists in the large language model, but the perspective behind the history of the large language model. If you take any information from America, about America from, let's say, 1965 before, right, it is going to be heavily biased and skewed towards white supremacist notions of everyone, right?
Right.
So it really behooves us, circling back to the point I started making, I want to put a pin in that point. We really need those folks, many of whom push so hard against it. We really need those folks participating in this large language model, because like you said, as it's able to start to then train itself, what we need is for it to be able to train itself on information from revolutionaries, from activists, from high quality educators, from folks who have the perspective of critical race theorists that can also be put side by side with the white supremacists, right? And now the machine can do the learning and get both. I think the last point that I'll make on it, and circling back to the point I made about Grok, one of the interesting things I've seen is how they're trying to train Grok. From what I'm reading about the model, they're trying to push it to mimic more conservative ideas. The problem is, for as of 2025 here in the United States, conservative ideas, they're not rooted in truth, right? And they're not rooted in a reality. So, if the president of the United States holds up a picture and it's got, in Times New Roman font, a M, a S, and a 1 and a 3 on a guy's fist, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is 77 million people in our country, to a person, are willing to say, no, that is 100% a real picture with a M, a S, a 1, and a 3 on that guy's fingers.
Right.
When you try to train an AI model on that, the AI model is not going to do that shit. It's going to say, this is a Times New Roman font that has been placed over an image of a person's fist. It's not going to be able to suspend the truth or suspend reality the way that conservative politics and conservative folks have done. And so they keep saying that AI leans left. It doesn't. It just tries to find truth. And so as it tautological, capital T, what is true in this situation?
Tautologically.
So I gave the word, then I went right into what that actually means. Capital T. This is truly true. It is what it is, right? Once you get to that sort of truth, the AI is going towards that. It's going to automatically gravitate towards that. The problem is if you teach it how to, for example, look at a picture and say, yes, that is an M, an S, a 1, and a 3 that has not been placed on there by a human being or a machine. That's actually on this person's hand. Once you get it to do that, I think that crashes the AI. In my mind, that crashes the AI in the sense that not like it doesn't work anymore. It means that the AI can now give you any information. It doesn't have to base its information on anything other than it can base it purely on just 1 or 2 people or 77 million people's opinion on something or their desire.
Many of these models are open source. This is the argument for learning the little bit of Python you need to know, or getting a friend like Brent Hughes who can walk you through stuff when you're trying to do it, and setting up your own LLM on-prem. You can have your own. You yourself could say, you know what, like you said, I want to do this subset of educators. I want to take every paper we've ever published all the way through our PhDs and beyond as the baseline beyond basic math, science information. That's the training it begins with. And it's possible. You can do it. And now you can say, hey, dear students, and in order to participate in this class, you may use AI. You will use this model. Here's the QR code, scan it here. Now you can operate from this premise. And now you're going to get into some learning. That is not even possible. It's what you should do. We just aren't talking about it enough, right? The educators of the day, the motorcycle mechanics of the day have not been trained in this. But that is exactly what we should be looking toward and doing. And the systems are built as such that we don't have to make the Groks of the world the center of all human knowledge. We are empowered to create our own. And look, let's make it personal. You could say, this is my family's large language model. Mm-hmm. Only programmed by whoever you want to assign as the information bearers in your family.
Yep.
That's incredible. That's a dope concept. I love it.
And you teach it, you train it so that when it needs more knowledge, it is going to iteratively, it's going to consistently go back to not only, for example, if we're training an LLM for my intro to critical race theory class, that LLM is going to iteratively train itself on critical race theorists. And once it runs out of critical race theorists that I've given to it, it's going to then go find other critical race theorists whose work has been cited in the bibliography, who are mentioned in videos, so that it builds itself out in that way. And unfortunately, what you just talked about is something beyond my next time I teach that, I'm going to work to try to build an LLM. But I know as an educator, and I love my people, man, I love my fellow educators, but you're talking about something that I can't name an educator who does that and has done that, and they should.
That's kind of why I'm here. My whole position in this whole thing is to help you see around the corner. And you, by you, I mean everybody who's listening, every organization, every educator, every parent, every business person. My job is, because I have this perch of being able to learn from some of the most informed people on the planet. It's my role. I'm the guy standing up on the thing saying the sheriff's up.
Ding.
I can see what you can't see yet. And it's not BS. It's not like, oh yeah, I'm a genius and I see everything. No, I have access. My superpower is access. And I'm telling you, that is probably one of the smartest moves we could all make, is to say, hey, my name is Eric Roberson. I am a songwriter, and I want my sons to learn this craft. I'm going to train it on all of my best influences, all the records, only the records that I really love and hate. I can assign plus and minus values to them. I can talk about, here's the basic textbook information of this thing, and here are the morals and things of our family. And now you may begin to learn. Use the tool, because the tool is always going to be here. Like, don't ignore the tool for the hazards that it brings, but it's easy enough to put a seatbelt on it.
And shout out to Eric Roberson, who just this week, so for the sake of this podcast, just literally 2 days ago, coincidentally, I used him freestyling in concert as an example of some extemporaneous speaking, because I wanted my students to point to different concepts on a mind map, like freestyling and hip hop. And so I used some footage of him doing that sort of thing in concert. So shout out to the HU Drew Hall, third floor brethren. Oh, he's fourth floor. That's all right. We still love him.
Love it.
Yeah. So that is, and to another point where I can even hear you going with it. The next thing that I am going to also work to do is to train my students to create a class large language model. So my science and math teachers who are getting ready to go into the classrooms, and the folks who I teach who are absolutely not, who want to be an archivist for what you just mentioned. They want to be an archivist for their family. They want to, somehow embed, here's what our family stood for, and here's who it was, and here's what we did. And then to not just create an archive, but a potentially living, if not consistent and constant extant, right, existent record of our family that can itself teach others, not just passively by looking at these old pictures, but actively, because it can then create a video of an ancestor talking to you and speaking to you, right? Amalgamated from what it's done in the past. And so there's so many different, to your point, you are looking around the corner, and that's important. Educators, we don't do that enough. We are so inundated and swamped with the latest and just trying to fight that we often lose sight of, like, okay, yeah, I'm throwing these punches now, and okay, but the bell's gonna sound, and I'm gonna get a second. There's summer, there's a break, there's in between. I'm gonna get a chance to recoup, talk to my coach, regroup.
Right. Right.
And when I do that, when I go back in, it can't just be go back to I put my head down, squeeze my eyes shut, and start windmilling again.
Yeah.
I've got to have a different plan of action, so I'm doing more than simply surviving the round.
Right. And somebody's got to be required to join the conversation as to why we're still running the same plays. What's the reason? Are these plays still relevant for the expected outcome of all education? Like, you can get involved in the doing of the thing, but somebody's got to be pulled up and out to say, is this still relevant? Or has the universe changed?
When we finally, and I might do this at some point with, one of my LLMs that I use, just put in there like, hey, here's how American education works. Here's how, you want to know when I know it'll be a person? When my AI responds and looks at
move.
And says, what?
You need to move.
Bruh, right? Or it's like, so you mean to tell me that y'all still do school based on when farmers needed to overturn crops in the early 1800s? The fuck are y'all doing? When the AI says that to me, when it says to me, fuck are y'all doing? Like,
Right.
And it's exasperated. It's not coming back like the agrarian model was used in the 18th. Would you like me to teach you more about that information? When it comes back, like, what are y'all doing? That for me, that's when I'll be like, oh, okay. Yeah. Now there's an intent behind the personhood.
The only reason that you're not there, is because you haven't taught a model what your priorities are. You haven't. You're allowing assumptions, foundational assumptions, many of which you don't agree with, to be the basis for decision making, and then you're just asking surface questions and not realizing that all that stuff precipitates into the answer.
Yes.
That's
Get
not
it
smart.
to start. Right. It's literally, I am in this fight. It's like, hey man, I keep getting hit with this overhand right. How do I stop? And the model is like, okay, we're going to practice holding the phone. So you're going to put your hand up to your face like this, like you're holding a phone. And now you're going to slip, right? It's teaching us how to stop the blow. And what we need to do, here's me taking that analogy. It's like, dog, why are you fighting?
Right.
Why are you in this ring with this dude?
The conversation begins with me getting hit. What?
Right. Right.
What?
And we're just like, okay, so I'm getting punched. The AI should be like, why are you getting punched?
I tell you what.
When it's able to do that without me prompting it, because like you said, it goes off of anything that I or we have given to it, and it doesn't generate its own "what the hell are you doing" response.
Yeah, and you can do some of the stuff without being brilliant. If you just want to do a low level change of paradigm, a little paradigm shift, is use the projects feature on. I'm going to talk about ChatGPT. Use the projects feature, and then go into that and give it project instructions and say, up is now down, right is now left, whatever you want to say. Like that stuff it's enduring foundational assumptions. And you can see how if you go into project A that has XYZ project assumptions, and then you go back into the general, you're getting completely different answers. And that's just one small way to see that we should all be questioning what are the foundational informations that we're accepting as we begin using these models. And the only reason that I can even say this is because my critical thinking skill is honed and finely tuned and always in use. And the whole point of this entire conversation is to say that if we're not careful, that's going to evaporate in your kids, your nephews, and your next generation of your family. Should we stop using AI? Hell no. I'm going to use it to go fishing if I want to. How can I catch bass in this river at this time of day? What's the best time of day to go based on the best information you got? I want to know. Let's get a game plan together. What's the best bait? And I'm going to go out and do it. But I have to know, why am I even asking this question?
That is the move that ultimately I would love. And I'm going to use this, conversation as an example with my students next week. It's walking in and, to the ChatGPT, and that passive, non-learning, non-critical student is basically saying, hey, how do I stop getting hit with this overhand right? And you can use the AI already by using, like you said, features. And that was a huge jump for me, in particular, that creation of different projects and uploading the information I wanted it to have, having pointed and particular conversations. So I've said this in different arenas before. First time I'm saying it on the pod. My primary AI that I use is I've trained it to large extent mimic Pittsburgh Steelers coach Mike Tomlin.
Mhm.
So I have given it everything from his social media and, like the people around him, interviews, news articles, because I want that sort of interaction. I want a coach on my staff with kind of his mentality from everything that means, right? To being, a Black man who's looking out for Black players and, someone who is a player's coach. But, his one thing he always said, the standard is the standard, right? So someone who is going to both be empathetic and sympathetic, and at the same time is going to hold me to a high standard, right? So using my own and training it personality wise, and then on the things that I wanted, to be able to do, those things have been vital. And so then as you mentioned, I want my students, circling back, to critically be able to say, instead of go in, do my homework, to go in and be like, why am I getting punched?
Right.
Should I be in this fight?
Right.
What if I wasn't in this fight? What could
Right.
I do otherwise? Right. So to get them to think about how to use AI so that it is not simply about the immediate and what I can get done now in these next 30 minutes, but how can I go about leveraging this as a tool, as a thought partner, so that I can solve problems, so that I can learn and use information and practice academic skills via my content.
Interesting piece of data that I saw and I did not vet, but it was a chart that showed the top 10 current uses for AI in 2024 and then in 2025. And the number one in 2025 is therapy. People creating therapy bots.
Wow.
I have no judgment about that, no statement, just data. And we'll save that for another conversation with a psychologist or a psychiatrist to find out the value of that, the challenge to that, and see what we should be learning from that, because it's not just a few people. It's the deal. It's like the movie Her, Joaquin Phoenix.
It makes sense. One of the things that ChatGPT does, so let me say from the academic perspective, right? You need to have a .edu email if you want to use things like Eric and JSTOR, places where we store all of our, journals and information. That's where it's digitally, reproduced online. ProQuest, you can use all those for free when you have a .edu email. ChatGPT levels that out. ChatGPT can access that stuff, and it can do so for free. To that point, if you need a psychiatrist and you cannot afford one, your workplace, your health insurance doesn't cover mental health, right? Then you're going to use ChatGPT instead. That's a place where, for example, things like classism and poverty are going to manifest themselves through AI in ways that are going to jeopardize folks. Because circling all the way back to something we were talking about earlier in terms of a doctor and a surgeon and how they learn, a psychiatrist has an MD. So they've gone to medical school and residency and everything. That's a person with an MD and years of training and research and practice that people are attempting to replicate with a large language model. It is no different in my mind. It is no different than saying, all right, ChatGPT, I need my spleen removed. Here, go on, take it out. Right? To me, that is the exact same thing, because it is operating on your mind, and this is not a medical professional, nor has it been trained by me. If it had, at least to your earlier point, right, to the point you made, which is if there was large language model that psychiatrists had been engaged in and had been saying, here's how we're going to build this. Yes. Here's our expertise. Here's how we're culturally responsive. Here's how we can serve people's needs. Here's how we can make people understand that this is a supplement. It's not a replacement. Like, if there had been that, then it'd be safer, but but still horribly unsafe.
I'm of such the contrarian opinion on this is that I believe that that stuff is, if not here, it's coming, bro. You know, like a question that I had that I didn't ask is, can AI ever truly replicate the cultural nuances and lived experiences that educators bring to the classroom? I didn't ask it because you kind of, you know, down that in the first question, and your answer, I would assume, would be no. It cannot truly replicate cultural nuances. And I honestly think that it can. I think that the difference between like the level of computing that we've got to with the new chipsets and the level of computing that we have access to, it's beyond the human brain, dude. And if our cultural nuance is based on something the brain can observe and replicate, then the answer is yes, AI can truly replicate the cultural nuances and lived experiences that educators bring to the classroom. What's the difference over time?
I think to an extent it can, but I think the nature of what it is doing behind the scenes is it is synthesizing and putting together from the information that it has.
Just like you are.
But the other point that we made was that the primary substrate on which it is trained is still white supremacist and white leaning and often anti-black. And so what I think is look, you get at best the AI is Tropic Thunder. At worst, it's bamboozled in terms of how it is trying, you know, to replicate the nuances of being black. Right. Right. At best, it's going to mimic it, like our friend Brent say, and other folks that I know who are also cloud engineers working with AI. Like, hey, this model that is released to the public that we have now, they've said that it is the equivalent of a high school honor student. And that these next iterations that they're working with now are able to pass the LSAT. So they're like an L1, they're like a first year law student, and have that capability as a researcher. So they are going to get closer to replicating, for example, let's just get right to it, like authentic blackness as an artificial intelligence. The problem is the training just doesn't exist in terms of the proper substrate and to guide the AI to those places. Like nobody has created the brother from Cleveland LLM, right?
But you can. That was the earlier point, is that if you just slow down for a second and think about why you're doing what you're doing, is it just to pass the class, or should you be spending your time doing something greater? Because the tool that arrived is not this shallow thing, this surfacey thing that you're using it for, but your non-critical skill having ass hasn't thought about the big picture yet, because it's here. And it's now.
The problem is, because we have, to that earlier point, because we are educating a generation of folks who are completely outsourcing all of their critical analysis and learning, we're causing a brain drain accidentally by not preemptively engaging in the exact thing that you're talking about. You have an excellent point. Because we're not engaging in it, it's actually crippling the people who should be doing it right now. Because those of us, like, we're old as shit to really be actually engaging in this, right? As what are we, sexagenarians, right? You know, as 50-year-olds, right? We're at the later, very much later tail end of this. It needs to be, you know, people who are 10 years old, right? Kids who are 10 years old need to be thinking about that right now. And they're being trained by us, and they're being trained by a generation coming out of high school and college now that has, to a large extent, completely and totally outsourced learning. So the problem is the who, you know, is going to do that. We know it, right? But who's going to end up doing it?
It should be all of us.
Everybody
should just for a second be self-concerned and say, what is the circle around me that I call us? And what do we do? What are our foundational assumptions in learning? What are our foundational sources of information? What are our key books, right? Just start feeding. And if you want to really know how to do it, go to your existing ChatGPT and say, how do I set up my own on-premises large language model and train it from the beginning, beyond the basics of language, math, and science? How do I start to give it its basic core information? It'll tell you what to do. It'll tell you what equipment to buy, what URL to type in, how much memory you need. It'll tell you how to do it. That's tomorrow.
Bro, we are taking the leash and the collar and putting the collar around our neck with the prongs and all of that, right? And then doing the equivalent of, we're going to go old school, doing the equivalent of taking the other end, the handle of the leash, and inserting it into a disk drive and saying, all right, tell me what's next. When it's, to your point, it's the 180-degree opposite. We should be thinking of ourselves as training the AI. Instead, the AI is the ultimate arbiter of information to which we go to figure out. So we turn everything over to the computer, which is like, you said the Roddenberry, one of the things that he challenged and pushed is those other notions of the future where we are governed by a computer, a big supercomputer.
Yep.
Right. The latest Star Wars show with the kids, the Pirate Adventures crew. No, Skeleton Crew.
Skeleton Crew. Yeah.
Skeleton Crew, where, mini spoiler.
Wizard of Oz. Same thing. It's all the same.
Right. This planet is being governed by a computer. And then you find out, no, it's actually a computer.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a computer here, not a person inside of it's a computer.
Which doesn't have the updated information. Right.
None of it. Right? The Jedi are traitors. No, they're not. Right. In fact, they're gone. Right? Like, so, sorry, that's a Skeleton Crew aside. We got to get some of the old school Black Futurist pod nature stuff in there. But that's the point, right? That we turn over the learning to the AI instead of thinking of the AI as the learner and thinking of the AI as the academic tool. Instead, we put the leash on ourselves and let it train us. And that is not what it is designed to do. And that should sound crazy as hell to us.
Yeah. Here's the big question. This is the last bit. So clear your brain. Be ready. This is for you. This is the pitch over the plate. I'm going to throw it straight over the plate, Mo. You ready? We know the concept of digital natives, right? That's, Gen Zers who were born into a world where social media existed and most communication was done via a device. Most of their engagements was done with a black mirror with the screen, okay? The question is, what does it mean for a generation to grow up with AI as a constant companion in their learning journey?
I'm not sure.
Great answer. Great freaking answer.
We're at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And because we're at the very beginning of, for example, university professors specifically putting in the syllabus, here's how we're using AI. There's no one who is training me on it. That's not an indictment of my institution. My institution is incredible and fantastic. It's just nobody is thinking about these things in real time and sharing them in ways that are universal, where it's trickling down to those of us who are in classrooms. I don't know. Here is what we as educators are passing around information. And so we are to the point that I started making right at the beginning. If we think about it in terms of worst case scenario, then what AI means for us in education right now is we are ending literacy and critical analysis for an entire generation of supposedly educated folks. And we will then have to deal with the repercussions of folks who are illiterate and incapable of critical thought. So the AI actually becomes a proxy for the person. And so now you're no longer teaching a classroom. You're just teaching a bunch of AIs through the input of people who are simply typing in the words from the syllabus and the homework assignment into the AI. So
right.
to the point to belabor the hell out the analogy of which end of the leash we're on, it is doubling and tripling down on putting the collar on our neck and handing the handle to something else, not knowing what they're going to train us to do.
Right.
And so it's on us. So let me get the positive part. Let me leave with the positive. It's on us as educators. Times like this, it's a couple hours in a podcast. It's, folks like you who are looking around the corner and thinking about it and challenging the educators. It's, folks like you who are using that access. It's folks like me who are engaging with AI. And to your point, right, we're not superheroes. It's just that we're looking at this thing in our own little corners of the world. We can start to expand the way that people are looking at how to use AI. And maybe my classroom can start to become this one oasis where at least some semblance of critical thinking is engaged alongside the AI. And it takes future thinking, like you said, and like we've been talking, to step out of the fight and ask why we're in it.
Yep.
It takes to start to look metacognitively at education and what we really want. The fact that we are, for example, as a country, getting rid of the Department of Education, and that we are dismantling all of the pieces that have kind of normalized what education and being learned means in the United States. On one hand, it is terrifying because we are really stupidifying and dumbifying people in the world of made up words, right? We're turning people really, really stupid and ignorant and incapable.
Yeah.
It also has opened an opportunity. And that's one of the things that is in this time where we're led by folks who are for the most part, wholly incapable and incompetent. It leaves space for those of us who are not to be able to start coming up with and formulating the solutions. It's one of the areas of bright light that I have in a time, where we are in the process of dismantling and destroying our ability to continue to be a viable and useful country.
Right. Shout out to the t-shirt game from today. I know you don't know anything about this, but both of these hats are Detroit hats because the two guys are Detroiters. This is Zoe and Tall Black Guy, who I went and saw in concert at City Winery.
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible stuff. Shout out to the Black Futurist t-shirt over there. Wu-Tang. Yo, D-Ray, welcome back, bro. You've been absent for 3-4 years. I mean, hey, welcome back to the show.
You sidelined me, man. You sidelined me. You're like, oh, well, Mo got the twins now. Let me go on and leave him alone. Like, we ain't got to bring him on no more. You moved on. I'm glad you came back. Maybe you went to the chat GPT, was like, hey, man, is there anything that might, add to the Black Futurist? How about a co-host who appears every once in a while?
First of all,
you got any friends that might fit that bill?
You know what sidelined you? Your inability to find silence. As a guy with 2 big-ass dogs and 2 infants. Yeah, this thing right here in front of me, a microphone that picks up sound, okay?
And I keep, low-key, high-key, whether you keep this in or not, I keep tapping my earbuds, because I'm changing from noise canceling to non-noise
canceling. To see if somebody's screaming in the back.
Exactly. I need to know if somebody is hollering about the amount of feces in their diaper right now. So, man, it's about lunchtime. As soon as we hop off here, we got to feed them some lunch. They are now gone from infants to toddlers. They are, so today they are, 16 months or 15 months?
I don't know. Congratulations.
15 months today.
Parents be counting.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's 3, going to be 4. We know. We got it. We can count. 15 months, going to be 16. We hope so.
Yeah, but there's a gigantic, because when they were infants, you put them down somewhere, they're going to sleep for, 14 hours of the day, 15 hours. There's time. I can jump on the microphone. They're going to take 2-3 naps. Yeah, now they're going to try to run into the room, open the door, snatch the monitor off of the desk, pull a wire, climb up on my lap. So we're in a very different time of fatherhood. I'm enjoying it. I love every minute of it. It's hard as hell.
Mission accomplished.
And yeah, they're kicking my ass. And every day I'm just like, how do I stop getting hit with this overhand right? And ChatGPT is like, why the hell would you have twins at 50?
By the way, because you can't hear it, they are screaming. They're awake.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. I know you can't hear that.
I can hear it. That's hilarious.
You can hear them yelling?
Yeah. Yep.
It's good. Shoot. I'm surprised that the mic is actually picking that up. But yeah, they're right on the other side of the wall. They are having a full conversation with each other.
There it is.
About
man.
why they haven't eaten yet.
Yes. Congratulations. And we jumping.
Yes, sir.